I never thought a single evening could unravel everything I believed about myself, but as I stood frozen in the doorway of my wife's sister's apartment, I realized I was already too late to stop it. The air smelled faintly of lavender and something else, something foreign that stirred a mix of curiosity and dread in me. She smiled, sharp and precise, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. "You've always been a bit rough around the edges," she said, and there was no judgment to her tone, only certainty. "I think it's time we refined that, don't you?" I laughed nervously, but the sound died in my throat as she stepped closer, her presence both commanding and strangely gentle. I had come over for a casual dinner, unaware that the evening would become a mirror held up to my deepest insecurities. Her hands were cool as they guided mine to a chair, and before I understood, I was seated, feeling strangely exposed. There was a drawer she opened with a click, and inside, rows of cosmetics, delicate clothing, and hair accessories stared back at me like a secret world I'd never imagined entering. "We're going to have some fun," she whispered, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of amusement and purpose. I felt a shiver of fear. Was this some joke? But the way she looked at me, unwavering, made it clear that she didn't see me as a man tonight. She saw something else, something hidden. The first brush of powder on my face was electric, like touching a surface I hadn't known existed. I watched in the mirror as my jawline softened, my eyes seemed brighter, and for the first time, I wondered, could I even recognize myself if this was the version the world saw? Every careful stroke, every swirl of color, carried a message I couldn't yet name. She hummed softly, a melody that felt almost hypnotic, and I noticed my hands trembling. Not from fear, exactly, but from the strange thrill of surrender. And then came the clothes. Silk, lace, and pastel fabrics that brushed against my skin like whispers. She guided me through each layer, adjusting, coaxing, and somehow I let her. My body felt foreign in these garments, yet comforting, as though some part of me had been waiting decades for this touch, this gentle insistence. I caught my reflection halfway through, my eyes wide, my lips slightly parted, and I realized my heartbeat was loud in my own ears. There was tension, yes, but also something dangerously addictive in the way I looked, the way I felt being transformed. By the time she finished, I was unrecognizable to myself and yet profoundly aware of a new reflection that seemed almost right. My voice, soft and unpracticed, sounded alien when she asked me to speak. I stumbled, laughed nervously, but she only smiled and reassured me that this was my journey as much as hers. Every fiber of my identity seemed to vibrate in the tension between fear and fascination. Could I ever go back to the man I was? The thought both terrified and intrigued me. Her eyes caught mine, and she said quietly, almost reverently, "You're beautiful. And you belong here, even if you don't yet believe it." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind raced. My chest ached with strange longing, and somewhere deep inside, I felt the first crack in the wall of who I had been. Tonight, nothing would ever be the same. I didn't sleep that night. The apartment was quiet, but my mind was a storm of thoughts and images. I kept replaying the moment I saw myself fully dressed, transformed, standing in front of her mirror. It wasn't just the clothes or the makeup, it was the way I felt inside. Something had shifted. Something I didn't have words for yet, and maybe never fully would. My hands traced my face again and again, marveling at the softness I hadn't thought I could ever see in my own reflection. I felt strange guilt mixed with exhilaration. Who was I now? And who had I been before? The next morning, she was already up, moving around the kitchen with effortless grace, and I followed her like a shadow, my body still stiff from yesterday's metamorphosis. She served tea with a smile that made my stomach twist with a combination of anticipation and nervousness. "You looked amazing last night," she said, almost offhandedly, but her eyes lingered on me in a way that made my heart stutter. I mumbled a thank you, unsure if the words were meant for me or for some version of myself I was only beginning to discover. Then came the plan. She told me, calmly and firmly, that this transformation wasn't a one-night experiment. She had ideas, suggestions, rules even, and I was to follow them. Not because I had no choice, though part of me felt I didn't, but because she convinced me, without coercion, just certainty, that this journey could lead to something I'd been avoiding all my life, an understanding of myself beyond the labels I'd clung to. The first task was simple yet terrifying, wear what she chose for me to the local market. The thought of walking among strangers in unfamiliar clothing, each gaze potentially dissecting me, made my throat tight and my legs weak. She helped me into a delicate blouse and a skirt that swayed with each movement. My hair was brushed into soft waves, a subtle scent of lavender in the air. When I looked in the mirror, my heart sank and soared at the same time. I wasn't myself. And yet, for the first time, I didn't hate it. We left the apartment, her hand lightly guiding mine as we stepped into the bustling streets. Every passerby seemed like a test, a judgment I wasn't sure I could survive. My pace faltered, my breathing quickened, but she whispered encouragement, her presence a tether that kept me from bolting. People glanced, some with curiosity, some indifferent, and a small, unexpected thrill sparked inside me with every passing look. I noticed the way the skirt moved, the soft brush of fabric against my legs, the way my chest felt lighter, yet more noticeable. This world felt new, frightening, irresistible. By the time we returned home, I was exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. She smiled, proud, and told me that this was only the beginning. There would be more lessons, more changes, and more ways to explore the reflection staring back at me. I collapsed onto the couch, my mind a whirl of identity and doubt, fear and fascination. Could I ever face the world as myself again, or had myself already changed irrevocably? That night, as she tidied her apartment, I sat silently before her mirror, tracing the curves of my own face and the new contours of my body. I felt tears welling up, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming intensity of being seen, not just by her, but by the version of me that had always been hiding. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet, stubborn spark whispered that maybe this forced transformation wasn't punishment, it was liberation. And yet, fear lingered like a shadow, whispering that the world outside would never understand, that I might never understand myself fully. She watched me silently, as if she knew every thought racing through my mind. "You're stronger than you think," she said softly. "And beautiful. Don't forget that." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to surrender entirely, but the walls inside me, built over years of certainty and denial, trembled, yet did not fall. I was caught between fear and fascination, between who I had been and who I was becoming, and the line between the two was already blurring in ways I couldn't resist. The days that followed were unlike anything I had ever experienced. Each morning began with her guiding me into the clothes she chose, each outfit a careful orchestration of colors, textures, and subtle power. It wasn't just clothing. It was a declaration, a challenge, a mirror reflecting the parts of myself I had long ignored. She instructed me on posture, on the way I should carry myself, how to let my hands move with grace instead of habit. At first, it felt absurd, ridiculous even, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, my reflection began to shift. Not just my face, not just my figure, but something in the way I held my own gaze. She had a way of looking at me that was neither judgmental nor indulgent. It was exacting, precise, yet patient. "Notice how your shoulders drop when you relax," she said one afternoon as I fumbled with the delicate clasp of a necklace. "You can be strong, but you don't have to be rigid." Her words were instructions, but also lessons in something far more dangerous: self-permission. The idea that I could inhabit this other version of myself, fully, without shame, was terrifying. And yet, every time I caught a glimpse of my reflection, a quiet, thrilling certainty crept in, whispering that perhaps this side of me had always been waiting for release. She introduced me to subtle details I had never considered. The curve of my eyebrows, the way lipstick could shift the entire expression of my face, the way a gentle sway, while walking, could change the way the world saw me. Each lesson was meticulous, sometimes exhausting, but I found myself eager, almost addicted, to her guidance. When I stumbled, when my hands betrayed their old clumsiness, she corrected me with a calm hand on my wrist, a soft smile that said, without words, "You can do this. You already are." Social interactions became a new battlefield. She insisted I meet her friends, attend small gatherings, practice conversation while dressed, moving through the world as this new persona. I felt exposed, fragile, a tightrope walker above a city of scrutiny, but I was learning something profound, that identity was fluid, that the walls I had built around myself were not unbreakable. People smiled, they nodded, they accepted me, or at least the version of me they saw, and each encounter left me exhilarated, exhausted, and achingly aware of the tension between fear and delight. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of lessons, she sat me down with a quiet intensity one had not seen before. "You've changed," she said simply, almost as if stating a fact. "Not just how you look, but how you carry yourself. You've discovered something." I wanted to protest, to claim that I was still me, the man I had always been, but even as the words formed in my mind, I saw the truth reflected in the mirror. The face looking back at me was soft, yet determined, hesitant, yet unafraid. Something within me had shifted irreversibly, and I could not turn back. The tension inside me built with every passing day. I was elated by my transformation, terrified by it, ashamed and proud in equal measure. I began to question everything I had believed about myself, about desire, about who I was meant to be. In quiet moments, alone in her apartment, I would study my reflection, tracing every line, every curve, every nuance that was no longer mine in the way I had once thought it was. I felt grief for the self I had lost and a strange, intoxicating hope for the self I was becoming. And yet, even as I embraced these changes, a part of me resisted. I feared what the world outside her apartment might say, feared judgment, feared the impossibility of undoing the layers she had so carefully guided me through. But every time I faltered, she was there, not demanding, not pressuring, just present, a steady anchor in a storm of self-doubt and revelation. Her presence made surrender possible, made the impossible feel necessary, made transformation not just an act, but a journey of discovery. By the end of the week, I barely recognized the person I had been. The man who had arrived timid, hesitant, uncertain, was a shadow compared to the emerging figure I saw in the mirror, a figure that was soft, expressive, graceful, undeniably me, yet not me in any way I had expected. And in that reflection, I realized that what had begun as her insistence, her gentle insistence that I transform, had become something far more profound, a liberation I didn't yet fully understand, but one I could no longer deny. The next morning, I woke with a strange mix of anticipation and dread. Today, she had decided, I would step outside the apartment in full view of the world, fully dressed, fully transformed. The thought made my stomach knot, but the excitement thrummed beneath it, sharp and insistent. As she handed me a carefully chosen outfit, a soft, flowing dress in muted tones, paired with shoes that clicked delicately on the floor, I felt my hand shake. My reflection in the mirror seemed to be staring at me with a question I couldn't yet answer. Could I really step out and face people like this? Her touch was calm as she brushed a stray lock of hair from my face. "You are ready," she said, and there was no doubt in her voice. I wanted to believe her, to fully surrender to this guidance, but a nervous tremor ran through me. My mind raced with imagined scenarios, snickers, stares, whispers, but there was also a flicker of defiance, a small flame whispering that perhaps I could survive this, and maybe even thrive. When we stepped onto the street, the world seemed larger, sharper, more alive. Every sound was amplified, the distant hum of traffic, the rustle of leaves, the quiet cadence of my own footsteps. My dress swayed with every movement, my hair catching the morning light, and I realized with a shock that I was being seen. Not as a man, not as a boy, not as someone hiding, but as this new version of myself she had so carefully helped me create. And for the first time, I felt the weight of possibility pressing against the edges of my fear. People glanced, as I had expected, and some smiled, some looked away, and a few did double takes. Each reaction sent jolts through my body, sometimes embarrassment, sometimes exhilaration. She walked beside me, steady and confident, and I drew strength from her presence. When I faltered, nearly tripping on the uneven pavement, she caught my arm gently, whispered reassurances, and reminded me to lift my chin, let my shoulders relax. Step by step, I began to realize that the world outside was not as dangerous as my imagination had made it, but it was still a test. And I was learning, painfully and beautifully, how to pass it. By noon, we had ventured into a small cafe, and she insisted I order our drinks. My voice, soft and hesitant, faltered at first, but under her gentle guidance, I found a rhythm, a cadence that felt like it belonged. People around us barely noticed, or if they did, they reacted with casual acceptance. Each small victory tightened the bond between thrill and fear, making my heart race in ways I had never known. I felt exposed, yet alive, a contradiction that left me dizzy with new sensations and emotions I didn't yet have names for. When we returned to her apartment later that afternoon, I collapsed onto the couch, muscles trembling from exhaustion. She brought me a cup of tea, sat beside me, and didn't speak immediately. I looked at her, and in that quiet moment, I saw the pride in her eyes. Not pride in controlling me, not pride in a change imposed, but pride in the person I had begun to discover, the courage I had shown simply by stepping into the world as myself, as her version of myself. That night, as I lay in front of the mirror again, tracing the curve of my jaw, the softness of my cheeks, the gentle tilt of my eyes, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just about appearances anymore, it was about identity, about the possibility of being more than the version of myself I had always known. The reflection staring back at me was real, undeniably beautiful, and it was mine. And yet, the fear lingered, a shadow beneath the thrill, whispering doubts about what others might think, what I might lose, what I might never be able to reclaim. But even with that fear, a small, defiant spark whispered insistently, "This is who you are now. You can embrace it. You can survive it. You can thrive." And for the first time, I believed that spark might be right. The journey was far from over, and the road ahead promised more challenges, more revelations, more moments that would test the limits of fear, shame, and acceptance. Yet in that quiet, reflective moment, I realized that I was no longer running. I was stepping forward, and with every step, the transformation felt less like a force imposed upon me, and more like a path I had chosen, whether I admitted it or not. The days blurred together after that first outing, each one a mix of anticipation, self-doubt, and growing fascination with this new version of myself. She began introducing subtler lessons, gestures, expressions, ways of sitting and moving that seemed inconsequential, but gradually reshaped the way I experienced my own body. I found myself observing every reflection, every shadow, every angle, as if my entire existence had been reframed through a lens I had never noticed before. It was exhausting and exhilarating at once. One afternoon, she had me practice smiling, not just a polite, empty smile, but one that conveyed warmth, charm, and confidence. "Your face tells a story," she explained, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "Learn to tell it with intention. People respond to the energy you project, not just the words you speak." I tried, fumbling at first, watching the muscles in my cheeks and eyes respond in ways that felt foreign yet intoxicating. When I caught my reflection, there was a flicker of pride mixed with disbelief. I was learning to embody something I had never allowed myself to imagine. Then came a test I hadn't anticipated: social interaction without her presence. She insisted I meet a friend of hers for coffee while she stayed home. Panic surged through me as I imagined stepping outside alone, facing judgment, scrutiny, and my own insecurities head-on. But she didn't leave me unprepared. She coached me, guiding me through imagined conversations, rehearsing tone, gestures, and posture. I listened, absorbed, and finally nodded, understanding that this was more than a practice. It was a step toward claiming this identity as my own, beyond her guidance. I walked to the cafe with trembling steps, the soft click of my shoes on the pavement echoing like a heartbeat. My reflection in the store windows startled me at first. The dress flowed perfectly, my hair caught the sunlight just right, my posture straighter than I had ever held it before. Strangers glanced, some curious, some indifferent, and I realized with a jolt that I wasn't afraid of being seen anymore. Not entirely. My heart pounded, yes, but it was not terror. It was a strange mix of exhilaration and pride. I was learning, painfully and beautifully, how to navigate the world in this new skin. The cafe itself was a blur of scents, sounds, and movements. I fumbled at first, my voice soft and hesitant, but gradually I found a rhythm, a flow in conversation that felt astonishingly natural. The friend smiled warmly, treated me with casual kindness, and I felt my confidence expand in real time. It was a revelation. People could see me, accept me, and even respond to me positively in this form. My reflection in the polished tabletop stared back at me with curiosity, wonder, and a spark of something I couldn't yet name: freedom. Returning home, I felt a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. She was waiting, serene, a quiet smile on her face. "You did beautifully," she said, brushing my hair lightly from my face. "Notice how it feels when the world responds to the real you? That's the power you've been avoiding." I nodded. The words failed me. I was overwhelmed by the intensity of the day, by the stark contrast between fear and exhilaration, by the fragile, thrilling clarity that perhaps this was more than just a temporary experiment. It was a revelation, a transformation, a path I had never dared to tread. That night, alone before the mirror, I studied myself in silence. The reflection was no longer foreign. It was familiar, yet still new. I traced the lines of my face, the gentle curve of my neck, the softness of my hands. I realized that every layer of makeup, every choice of clothing, every lesson she had imparted was more than a superficial change. It had shifted the way I felt in my own skin. And somewhere beneath the layers of fear and doubt, a quiet sense of acceptance began to grow. Maybe I thought this wasn't about losing who I was. Maybe it was about discovering who I truly could be. Yet even as this thought settled, a flicker of uncertainty remained. How far could I go? How much of myself could I truly embrace before the world outside became unbearable? But then, I remembered her words. "You are stronger than you think. You are beautiful." And for the first time, I realized that perhaps the person staring back at me in the mirror, soft, graceful, transformed, was not someone to fear or reject. She was someone I could finally begin to understand, someone I could finally begin to accept. And in that acceptance, I felt something shift deep inside, a fragile but undeniable promise of freedom. The days grew longer, yet somehow time seemed to stretch and compress all at once. Each morning, her calm, precise guidance became a ritual I both craved and feared. The simple act of dressing, once mundane, was now a ceremony of discovery. Fabrics brushed against my skin like gentle reminders of a self I had long ignored, each layer a whisper of who I could be. And with every brushstroke of makeup, every subtle adjustment of posture or expression, I felt myself slipping further away from the version of me I had always known. One afternoon, she asked me to sit across from her at the small kitchen table, sunlight spilling over the polished surface. "Look at yourself," she said, pointing to the mirror on the wall beside us. "Not as the person you were, not even as the person I've helped create, but as the person you choose to be." I swallowed hard. The words seemed simple, but the weight behind them pressed into my chest. I stared at my reflection, the soft curve of my cheeks, the shine in my eyes, the subtle grace in my movements, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear. Not entirely. I felt possibility, and it terrified me. She watched me closely as I traced my jawline, my fingers trembling slightly. "Do you see her?" she asked softly. "Not a costume, not a role, but you?" I hesitated. How could I? The person in the mirror was undeniably me, yet also someone entirely new, someone I had never dared to acknowledge before. My heartbeat thumped against my ribs, a chaotic rhythm of doubt, wonder, and something dangerously close to pride. I don't know, I admitted finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I feel different, but it's hard to say if it's real." She leaned forward, resting her hand gently on mine. "It's real because you're feeling it. That's the only measure that matters. You're not pretending. You're discovering." From that moment, I began noticing subtle changes in myself outside of her apartment. When I walked down the street, I caught myself unconsciously adjusting my posture, tilting my head, allowing a soft grace to emerge in gestures I had never practiced before. In cafes, at the market, even passing reflections in windows, I found a growing curiosity in how I appeared to the world. There was a thrill, yes, but also a quiet, insistent reassurance. This wasn't a game anymore. It was life, unfolding in ways I hadn't imagined possible. She pushed me gently, not cruelly, to explore these changes. One day, she had me write a journal, recording every sensation, every thought, every emotional spike from my experiences as this new version of myself. Reading my own words was almost disorienting. I saw fear, yes, but also pride, fascination, and a strange joy that made my chest ache. I was beginning to internalize the transformation, to feel it not as something imposed upon me, but as something emerging from within. But the emotional tipping point came quietly, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. I had been practicing expressions in the mirror, attempting a smile that felt honest rather than learned. My reflection caught me off guard. I wasn't seeing her or even him, or some hybrid version I thought I would hate. I was seeing myself fully, for the first time, reflected in a way that was neither forced nor fake. And in that moment, tears spilled down my cheeks, hot and trembling, because I realized I had been longing for this acceptance, for this reflection, my entire life. She sat beside me silently, letting me feel it without intrusion, without commentary. I pressed my face into my hands, shaking, laughing quietly between sobs. I was terrified and elated, grieving the self I had known while embracing the one I was becoming. Identity, I realized, was not a fixed shape. It could bend, stretch, and grow, and perhaps, if allowed, it could surprise me with beauty I had never imagined. That night, alone in front of the mirror, I lingered longer than usual. Every detail of my reflection felt alive: the subtle curve of my lips, the brightness of my eyes, the gentle sweep of hair across my shoulders. I traced my collarbone with trembling fingers, feeling a new intimacy with my own body. The fear hadn't vanished entirely, but it had softened into something I could live with, a quiet companion reminding me that transformation was as much an emotional journey as a visual one. For the first time, I whispered to my reflection, softly but with certainty, "You are enough. You are real. You are mine." And even as the words left my lips, I felt a fragile, profound sense of liberation settling into my chest. This wasn't the end of the journey. It was just the beginning, but for the first time, I felt ready to walk forward, fully and unafraid. The days that followed felt like I was walking through my own life with a new pair of eyes, eyes that noticed every shift in light, every curious glance, every moment where the world mirrored something back to me that I hadn't known how to see before. My wife's sister, my unlikely guide through all of this, seemed to sense every ripple inside me, every quiet internal tremor, and she navigated them with an uncanny calmness that both grounded and unsettled me. One morning, while I was combing through my hair, still learning the delicate, precise movements she had shown me, she appeared behind me in the mirror with an expression that hinted at some new challenge. I froze, half expecting another lesson, another transformation, another step into the unknown. But instead, she said something I wasn't prepared for. "It's time," she murmured, For you to be seen somewhere you can't hide behind the comfort of strangers. My stomach tightened. I already knew what she meant before she said the words. You're coming with me to a family gathering today. Family. The word landed with a weight I didn't know how to brace against. Strangers were easy, fleeting, forgettable, passing glances. Family was something else entirely. They knew me. They knew the man I had been. They knew the expectations, the history, the familiar patterns I'd lived inside for years. The idea of standing before them now, with soft hair, delicate clothing, quiet grace, felt like walking into a storm barefoot. I can't, I whispered, already shaking. She stepped closer, resting her hands gently on my shoulders. You can. And you will. Not because I'm forcing you, but because you've come too far to keep yourself hidden. Her words hit something deep and fragile inside me, a place that still clung to fear but was tired of running from who I was becoming. I nodded before I could talk myself out of it. Getting ready for that gathering felt like preparing for a ritual. She chose my outfit slowly, methodically, a soft blouse that fit my shoulders perfectly, a skirt that moved like a breath, delicate flats that made my steps sound light, unthreatening. She styled my hair with gentle hands, brushing and smoothing until it framed my face like it had always belonged there. When I looked in the mirror, my breath caught. I wasn't seeing a costume anymore. I was seeing a version of myself that felt frighteningly honest. Vulnerable, yes, but real. Real in a way the old version of me had never allowed himself to be. Walking out the door was like stepping off a cliff. Each step toward the family home felt heavier, louder, but she stayed close, her presence a quiet lifeline. Remember, she murmured as we reached the gate, you don't owe anyone an explanation you're not ready to give. You simply exist. That's enough. The moment we walked in, the hum of conversation paused. Eyes turned. Some widened, some softened, some shifted away. My heart pounded so loudly I could hardly hear the greetings. My breath felt thin, fragile. Every instinct screamed at me to run, hide, vanish. But then, something unexpected happened. Her mother approached me first. I braced myself, expecting judgment or confusion. Instead, she simply took my hands gently, studying my face with a warmth that disarmed every defense I'd built up. You look peaceful, she said quietly. I hope you feel that way. I didn't know what to say. My throat clenched around the words I wanted to offer, so I simply nodded, grateful for her kindness. Others slowly approached, cautious, curious, but soft in their questions. No accusation, no hostility, only adjustment. Like they were making room in their minds for this version of me, trying to understand it without breaking me in the process. I felt myself breathe, really breathe, for the first time since we arrived. Throughout the afternoon, I found myself drifting between conversations, noticing how differently people saw me now. Not simply because of the clothes or the hair or the makeup, but because of the way I carried myself. There was a softness in me now, a looseness in my shoulders, a gentleness in my expressions. I wasn't performing, I was simply existing in a way that had felt impossible before. But not everyone reacted kindly. One relative, a distant uncle, looked at me with a mixture of confusion and dismissal. Why like this? He muttered under his breath, not loud enough for most to hear, but loud enough to slice through my confidence. For a moment, I felt myself crumble inside, the old shame rushing back like a tide. Before I could step away, she appeared beside me, her voice calm and firm. Because this is who they are. And if you paid attention, you'd see how brave that is. The uncle muttered something and walked away. But the damage had been done, or so I thought. Because instead of collapsing under the weight of his words, something inside me quietly resisted. I stood straighter. I lifted my chin. I breathed. And I realized, with a trembling sense of clarity, that I no longer belonged to other people's expectations. I belonged to the version of myself I was finally learning to accept. By the time we returned home, my legs felt weak, my emotions worn thin, but something inside me felt profoundly changed. I sank onto the couch, covering my face with my hands as the tears, quiet, relieved, exhausted, finally came. She sat beside me, not speaking, simply resting her hand on mine. "You did more than I asked you to today," she whispered. "You faced the world as yourself. That's more strength than most people ever show." I leaned into her shoulder, feeling the weight of the day settle around me like a heavy blanket. I had been seen, truly seen, and though not all reactions were easy, I was still standing, still breathing, still becoming. For the first time, I felt a new kind of peace settling in my chest, fragile but unmistakable. A peace that whispered that I didn't have to hide anymore, that I didn't have to pretend, that I was allowed to exist in this shape, this softness, this truth. And for the first time, since this journey began, I believed it. The days after the family gathering were quieter, yet the quiet felt different now. Not empty, not void, but dense with possibility. Each morning, I woke and caught my reflection almost immediately. Soft eyes, subtle contours, a face I had grown used to seeing, yet still new enough to surprise me. I had begun to move through the world differently, my gestures more deliberate, my voice steadier, my presence somehow lighter, more fluid. And with each small change, the invisible walls around my old self cracked just a little more. She continued her lessons, though they were no longer just about appearance or movement. Now, she pushed me to explore the emotions that surfaced when I was fully seen. "You feel it," she said one morning as sunlight filtered through the window. "Don't shy away from it. Let it teach you what you've been hiding from yourself." I listened, nodding, though my chest throbbed with the fear of being too vulnerable. But slowly, piece by piece, I began to surrender. I allowed myself to feel pride without guilt, curiosity without shame, longing without confusion. One afternoon, she set up a small mirror in the middle of the living room and asked me to practice interacting with it as if it were a person. I laughed nervously. "Talk to it," I asked. "More than that," she said, tilting her head. "See it, acknowledge it, embrace it. Let it respond to you." I hesitated, then spoke, quietly at first. I don't know if I deserve this." The mirror reflected my own eyes back at me, wide and searching. I repeated the words, louder this time, and then stopped. And slowly, trembling, I whispered something I had never admitted to anyone, perhaps not even to myself. "I like her. I like her. I want her to exist." The reflection stared, unblinking, and something shifted. A warmth spread through me, fragile but undeniable. The fear was still there, yes, lurking in the corners of my mind, whispering doubts about the world outside, about acceptance, about whether this new self would ever be fully understood. But alongside it was a spark of defiance, of truth, of longing that refused to be denied. She came closer, placing her hand lightly on mine. "Then let her exist," she whispered. "No apologies. No hiding. No shame. She is yours, and she deserves your care." And I did. I began to inhabit this version of myself fully. Not just when she was present, not just when I was dressed or made up, but in quiet, private moments too. I lingered longer in front of the mirror, touching my cheeks, my hair, my lips, marveling at how natural it all began to feel. I walked through my apartment differently, spoke differently, even breathed differently. Each action was subtle, but together they formed a rhythm, a new language of being that belonged solely to me. The turning point came unexpectedly, one evening, when she suggested I meet her in the park. "No makeup this time," she said. "No carefully chosen outfits. Just you. See if she still exists." I panicked at first. The thought of facing the world unadorned, vulnerable, terrified me. But I followed her, trembling, heart hammering, each step a reminder that this journey had taken me far from the person I had been. When we arrived, the sunlight touched my hair and face in a way that made me pause. People passed us, joggers, families, friends walking dogs, and for the first time, I felt my skin without the armor of clothing or makeup. I caught their glances, fleeting and indifferent, and realized with a shock that it didn't terrify me anymore. I was being seen, truly in my essence, and the world continued on. I didn't need permission. I didn't need approval. I existed. And that alone was enough. She watched me quietly, her smile small but knowing.
See?
She is real, isn't she? I nodded, the tears pricking my eyes again. She is me, I whispered. And I love her. We walked through the park in silence, and for the first time, that silence felt complete. Not empty.
Not awkward.
But full of possibility, acceptance, and an understanding that I had never experienced before. Every step I took felt deliberate, graceful, and yet utterly natural. I was inhabiting myself fully, not the man I had been, not a version imposed, but the version that had quietly existed all along, waiting to be acknowledged. When we returned home, she handed me a cup of tea and sat beside me. "This journey isn't over," she said softly, "but you've crossed the point of no return. You've seen, felt, embraced. And that's what matters." I looked at her, my chest tight, my mind swirling with emotion. "I never imagined I could feel this free," I said. "Not just outside, but inside. All of me." She nodded. "You've discovered yourself. And that's the most powerful thing anyone can do." That night, alone in front of the mirror once more, I took a long, steady breath. I traced the curve of my jaw, the softness of my cheeks, the gentle tilt of my eyes, and I smiled. Not the practiced smile she had taught me, not the tentative smile of fear or self-doubt, but a real, full, unguarded smile. "I am her," I whispered, "and I am enough." The reflection blinked back at me, and for the first time, I felt complete. Every fear, every hesitation, every whispered doubt had been faced, tested, and softened into understanding. The transformation had begun as something forced, something guided, something I had resisted. And yet, through it all, I had found myself. I stood taller now, softer, stronger, unafraid. The journey had been difficult, unnerving, sometimes excruciatingly beautiful, but in the end, I had been reborn. Not as someone else. Not as a version imposed upon me, but as the self I had always carried quietly, waiting to be seen, waiting to be loved, waiting to step forward into the world with quiet, unwavering grace. And as I turned away from the mirror, the first truly peaceful, liberated night of my life stretched before me, infinite and bright. I was hers. I was me. I was free.